Welcome to Anthodish, the show about food, culture, and identity. I'm your host, Sarah Dugnan. Throughout this season of the show, we've been unpacking the myths and harmful assumptions that come into the perspectives of the global north around immigration, as well as the limitations and consequences of relying on a colonial and industrial food system. Today, we're shifting focus to look more deeply at the importance of resistance in fighting back against white supremacy, colonialism, and its violent legacy and ongoing contributions to how we think and experience food. Today I'm speaking with the most incredible Norma Listman and Saqib Keval to look at the types of solutions and communities that can be built around food when activism and ethical values are at the forefront of creation. Norma and Saqib are the chefs and restaurateurs behind Masala y Maíz, which was named by Time magazine as one of the top destinations to visit in the world, and its slightly more casual Indian-Mexican sister restaurant Marigold. Norma and Saqib were also just featured in the most recent season of Chef's Table on Netflix. Masala y Maíz seamlessly blends Indian, East African, and Mexican flavors, inspired by the cultures of the husband-wife team. In addition to being renowned globally for its genre-breaking and deeply personal cuisine, Masala y Maíz champions a movement of social justice through food, prioritizing the quality of life for their staff and farmers, and serving as a testament to the idea that a values-based workplace can also be a thriving workplace. In today's conversation, Norma and Saqib share how they moved the idea of Masala y Maíz from a research concept into a full restaurant, even after not being so sure about staying in the restaurant industry for all its shortcomings. How experiences with local flavors on a menu can fuck with your brain and decolonialize how you think about ingredients, and the importance of corn in cultural, social, and decolonial approaches to working and thinking about food. Here's my conversation with Norma and Saqib. Welcome to the show, Saqib and Norma. How are you both doing today?
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on. It's such a pleasure to be able to chat with you, especially, so far away from each other. It's kind of the magic of the internet for me. But before we kind of dive into what we're going to be talking about today, do you mind sharing a bit of background about who you are, where you're coming in from, and the type of work that you both do?
We're Norma and Saqib. We're co-owners and co-chefs of a restaurant in Mexico City. The restaurant, it's Masala y Maíz. We explore the intersections of the food between East Africa, India, and Mexico. We're very nerdy and we like to explore the histories of people migration, ingredient migration, and political movements.
The restaurant started, our work started looking at the politics behind food and how food can be used as a tool for not just storytelling, but also creating change. Masala y Maíz was really kind of part of it was born out of this nerdiness, like Norma said, but also this deep belief that we have in building a better restaurant industry and bringing in our backgrounds behind art, food, community organizing to kind of create, a politicized restaurant space.
And I think that's something that really shines through the moment that someone engages with the work that you're doing with Masala y Maíz. I'm curious too, as a fellow nerd, I love exploring the in-depth pieces of it. And I noticed that you had mentioned that Masala y Maíz had started as this research project that the two of you took on. So I'm curious if you could kind of speak to how it moved from this deep dive research project into dining experience for people to have.
Honestly, it was by chance. Saqib and I met in the Bay Area. I had moved back to Mexico I've done all of the research that I could around Mexican food living in the US. I moved there in 99, was there for 18 years, was exploring the food of the Californios, and it was time to come home. I also wanted to be close to the whole movement around land-raised corn that was happening in Mexico that had kind of started to flourish and gain momentum. So we were here. We had started Masala y Maíz 2 years previous to that out of chance. And to be honest, Saqib and I were tired of restaurants. We didn't want to work in restaurants anymore. We had a very strong critique of how restaurants are run and how they work. So we were like, we're not going to open a restaurant. I am going to do corn research. Saqib was in the Bay Area running People's Kitchen Collective that he can tell you about in a second. And we were supposed to be traveling and taking Masala y Maíz on the road. was born a couple of years prior to that, doing a dinner at a friend's house. It was the first time that we cooked together just for the experience of cooking together. We were throwing a party for friends. It wasn't because usually he would help me in my projects of Mexican cuisine and art practice, or I would be in support of or collaboration with People's Kitchen. But there was the first time that we cooked together and we're like, oh my God, there's something here. And we were at a market looking at ingredients, and this is how my family used it. This is how my family used it. This is how we use it in Mexico. This is where this ingredient came from. This is how it came from. And we just it blew our mind, the beauty that we created through those dishes, that dinner, that we wanted to keep doing it. But we're like, we're not going to do it. So Masala y Maíz in this collaboration was created by chance. It just was kind of something spontaneous. And then we were in Mexico, fast forward 2 years, we're in Mexico City, drinking some mezcales with some friends, restaurant and bar. There's a party and somebody offered me a restaurant spot. I said yes. And the rest, we're like, okay, if we're going to do this, then I went to Saqib and I was like, I'd love to do this with you. Think about it. You have 2 weeks. I know we were going to go travel in Japan, but I kind of want to do this. I feel it's a good opportunity. The space was right because it was a very experimental space that was used for artists to take a kitchen and explore their artistic practice, but also add the food component. And they would do this little, very inexpensive prefix menus that are called comida corrida. So it had that spirit. So, and it was set. There was a kitchen, there were tables, there were glasses and silverware. So we did it.
Yep. And it's it's a slippery slope. Life comes at you real fast. I think the other thing that really strikes me when I think about that moment is how we were received. We were so deep into the storytelling part of the research we were doing and so deep into uncovering these histories, and people were really interested in that and wanted to know more. I think, it's an easy connection to see the similarities between, Mexican gastronomy and South Asian gastronomy, but there's a lot of questions around why and how, And so that natural kind of connection, that surface level connection, I felt opened a lot of doors for us to go deeper, and people wanted more information and were really engaged with how we were cooking and working. And of course, the food was really good.
Also very important.
It wasn't as good as it is.
Yeah.
Definitely have evolved. It was good, it was new, and it was exciting, and it was the right moment at the right time in Mexico City.
I'm curious too, in terms of, as someone who's not a very good restaurant or recipe developer in any sense, I always have this fascination of, how you go from idea into the full presentation of the meal, the ingredients that you use, and particularly with the menu items that you offer at Masala y Maíz, the stories that go into those. Do you mind speaking a little bit to the process of, how you create these meals that not only are obviously very delicious to eat, but they have that spirit of your politics and the migration stories and the cultural stories that you want to tell on the plate as well?
I think a really great example of this in response to this question is Norma's Camarones Papelar. I think that sums up so much of the research practice, but also how she's presented the story in such a easily understandable way to break down such a complex idea. Take it away, Norma.
So vanilla, what do we think when we think about vanilla? We think about a sweet condiment, right? We think about something that it's put always in desserts. That could be kind of cheesy at times if it's not used properly. However, vanilla is, to me, not such a sweet condiment. It's astringent. It has so many layers. There's also different species of vanilla, right? I'm talking about the one that we most commonly know. And through my research and exploration of Mexican cuisine and Mexican ingredients, I was reading this text about the Totonacas, which were the Mesoamerican culture that lived in Veracruz, where vanilla is endemic to. And I read somewhere that they used to cook it with river prawns. And completely blew my mind because I was like, it made so much sense. And I decided to pay homage to that story by creating this dish at Masala y Maíz. That it's a very simple dish. It's 2 prawns that are grilled in arrobata. They're stuffed with chile morita, specifically Misantla, which is another small town in Veracruz, and it's very smoky. There we first extract all the seeds from the vine, and we steep ghee with those seeds. Then we use the vine, so we don't waste anything, and make this sort of like a salsa macha puree of chile morita, oil, and vanilla. We stuff the prawns with it. We grill them. We serve them with pickled beets, and on the side you get a little bit more of that hot salsa and a bit of that vanilla ghee. So what this dish does, it reclaims as savory ingredient, and it puts into question our belief, of what vanilla is. Vanilla, it's an ingredient that was colonized. The first people who took it from the region were the Aztecs, and they were the first ones to mix it with cacao. Then the colonizers took it to Europe, and then, the history of vanilla changed into a completely sweet thing, and completely, I don't know why, like I keep questioning and I haven't found the answer. Where does the term vanilla came from when somebody's vanilla? That means that somebody's bland, right? Why? To me, it's absolutely not. Actually, the color of vanilla is not white. It's almost black. So what this dish does, it also deconstructs, starts like fucking with your mind, basically, because you're eating something that in your memory of taste, you've been told that it's a sweet thing, and the smell, you relate it to something sweet. And all of a sudden you have this luscious, big, giant prawns that are spicy. But then you have this fatty ghee with the vanilla and the smoke of the grilling. And it really, really messes up with your mind and with the conceptions that you have of food in a very delicious way. So it's a way of reclaiming vanilla, of decolonizing vanilla, and of telling a different story of that one ingredient.
And it's so cool because, like Norma's saying, vanilla's been whitewashed over so many generations, right? Since it was colonized, that just even the idea, like when I think of vanilla cream in my head, right? Like I think of everything being like white and European. And she brings it back with that dish, like so distinctly to Mexico, and brings it, like shines this light as this is a Mexican ingredient. This is a Mexican technique that was then taken, colonized, and spread across the world, to give power to the global north and to the colonizers as like this, what do you call it? This like money-making crop, luxury ingredient, like money-making crop for them. But they stripped the culture from it, and you can see that repeated through what's happening with corn, what's happened, like all these different ingredients have gone through that same type of colonization. And I think that like using this recipe not only fucks with our brain as diners, like Norma's saying, but also shines this light on the power structures and the systemic oppressions that happen throughout the life of an ingredient, right? And how this ingredient is consumed throughout the world. And that type of like looking at the migration of this ingredient brings up so many other questions, and brings about like so much other of the politics that are implicated through this migration, right? All those fucked up stories and those fucked up histories of colonization, theft, of moving an ingredient throughout the global south, like all of that systemic power imbalance comes up just through that one recipe that she's made.
And I think often about, when I was kind of up and coming in undergraduate with anthro classes, like you could read about how ingredients were colonized, but it doesn't have the same visceral effect to learn through experience. And I think even that process of being able to dine and eat and experience it physically also disrupts the very, the flattening process that even occurs like through reading about it instead of actually exactly. Yeah. So you spoke a little bit about corn, and I wanted to ask if you would be able to dive into it a bit more, particularly particularly in terms of, the politics of ingredients, the politics of sourcing. How do you look at sourcing ingredients for your restaurant, but also speak to those stories of the politics of food and the historical exploitations that occur with particular ingredients as well?
How much time do we have? Let's I don't know if you know about the fight that is happening right now with the U.S. and Mexico with TEMEC, which the Treaty of Free Commerce between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. Basically, the last Mexican president, passed a law in Mexico that we were not gonna grow or buy GMO corn, especially from the U.S. or just in Mexico, and not especially from the U.S. Most or all the GMO corn that Mexico consumes mainly comes from the U.S. to Mexico. So you can imagine the uproar that it did to the U.S. We are in a legal battle because of TEMEC. The U.S. is saying that Mexico cannot do that. And then the question is, what about food sovereignty? Why does a country doesn't have the right to decide what is good for them? Especially corn is not just a crop. Corn, it's so intertwined with culture, with religion, to, yes, like an intricate part of the food system and how we grow things in Mexico. So it is a very delicate moment. The Claudia Sheinbaum, the new president, it's fighting to say, no, we are not going to allow GMO corn in Mexico. So there's that on the ground, on the one side, that this is currently what is happening in the battle that we're having with the U.S. in particular, to not consume GMO corn and to not consume corn from companies like Monsanto that have really damaged farm workers in different states, farm workers that have lost huge legal battles because their fields get contaminated with Monsanto crops. So we have all of that on one side that we're battling with. And then on the other side, we have companies like Hacienda in the US that are exotifying land-raised corn. And they're using terminology like, oh, this is a third wave of corn, using like the same branding that coffee did to sell corn in Mexico. And now they've gone into, stores like Whole Foods or in all the restaurants, and they market themselves as the company that is doing it right, that are bringing you corn direct from farmers. However, there is not enough Mexican corn to go around and to be consumed in all the world for a company like Hacienda to be exploiting the land in that way on the one side. The second hand, they have disrupted the system in a way that now there are coyotes. Coyotes are the nickname for the people who are moving crops or moving ingredients or moving people not legal or not right. So what's happening is, let's say they sign a deal with Whole Foods, and Whole Foods is like, okay, yes, but I need you to provide this amount of your blue corn masarina. Let's take that as an example. Blue corn, there are infinitive number of varieties of blue corn. What this company is doing, it's putting mishmashing blue corn from all places in the country to be able to fulfill this big orders that the U.S. is requiring. And what that does is, it's culturally erasing the relevance of each specific type of corn. Two, when people come to farmers and offer them money for their crop and maybe offer them a little more money than they would make elsewhere, they're going to sell that crop. They're not going to have enough people companies like them, what they're not doing is securing that these farmers have enough corn for autoconsumo, for self-sustenance, and then selling their exceeding corn. So they're selling the corn that they would usually use for themselves and for their family, which in result makes them buy cheaper corn that perhaps comes from the US and perhaps is genetically modified. So then the culinary traditions will get erased. The corn is being extractive. They're just very extractive companies, and all to fulfill the need of the global north, saying that they're doing the right thing. You know, what I've been fighting and what I've been saying for a long time is that the US in particular should be eating American corn. There is a huge history of Native American cuisine who also nixtamalizes, who also uses corn. And to me, the logical thing would be like, if we're so much in food about local food, we should be also localizing the consumption of corn and supporting maybe those farmers that do have that knowledge and do know how to grow that corn. So that is like, in short, part of like what I see between specifically the US and Mexico in terms of corn. Corn in Mexico, it's everywhere. We have the fortune to have an incredible farmer that grows our corn a few kilometers outside of the restaurant radius. He's right on the skirt of the volcano. It's delicious fighter. He hates his companies. He always comes to me and he's like, I hate they come and offer me very little money. Who do they think they are? Like, you know, and he's incredible. And to me, it's our responsibility as chefs to be thoughtful, meaningful, and to do the right thing with farmers. And corn is an ingredient that has so many layers. So many. We can probably speak for hours about this.
Definitely.
And it's really, and it just like goes to show how the global north, like again, right, this idea of consuming an ingredient without interacting with the culture or without respecting the culture that the ingredient comes from. Just like the issue with vanilla that Norma brings up in the Camarones Papelar dish, right? Like, it's colonization all over again, right? The global north always wants to consume and steal without meaningfully contributing to the culture of society or caring for the producers.
And it happens in Mexico too. Mexicans do it too. Whitexicans do it too. And I would say that the owner of this company, his mother is Mexican, and he's reclaiming that he's getting in touch with his culture. But how, you know?
And for who too?
And
at what scale?
Yeah.
It's this thing of like corn, and so many of the ingredients that we work with at the restaurant are highly local, small productions that are specific to a particular community. And we do so much work to be thoughtful consumers, have traceability, and have meaningful relationships with the producers to work under the scale that they can produce, right? Like, we're not trying to get corn from, or whatever ingredient from multiple producers and mix it together to meet our needs. We're adjusting our needs based off of what the farmers or the fisher folk can produce. And I think that's important, because that's how we respect not just like the environment, but also the cultural sustainability of these ingredients, right? We're not trying to push growth or enforce some type of scale up.
Yeah, I'm realizing too, we're interviewing at a very interesting time because as a Canadian and with both of you in Mexico, we're kind of on, opposite sides of the American tariff situation as well. And there's been so many conversations in Canada about, switching to eating more Canadian-based foods, but obviously Canada's gigantic as well. So the idea of, returning to more local, sustainable pieces that are not so focused on scale, I think is something, especially for Canadians, that's not a conversation that was really on the table until recently. So I'm realizing what you're saying as well, I think is kind of novel in that sense for Canadians, but also that layer of maintaining food sovereignty and maintaining that cultural element to ingredients needs to be very, very present in that as well.
Well, that's the whole thing about white supremacy, right? Like, white supremacy banks off of this idea of the other is always more exotic, and that this idea that white Americans or white Canadians don't have their own culture, and that the land that they're occupying didn't have a culture before they colonized it, right? Like this idea of eating local only being a European concept, or that in order to have, an exotic meal that you need to buy specialty ingredients from somewhere in the global south. Like that was the whole fucking spice trade. That was the whole reason why colonization happened. And the fact that we're still stuck in the same conversation is really troubling, right? Because that's how deeply entwined white supremacy is in the food cultures of the US, of Canada, and so much of the global north, that traps diners and traps everyone, not just white folks, but into always wanting to exploit or find something new, exotic, trendy from the global south, from a different community that they can take from, as opposed to reckoning with their history of colonization and the impact that their occupations had on the indigenous communities and the indigenous food systems of their respective lands.
Hugely so. And I think the expectation too of, 24/7 access to those ingredients, particularly in a restaurant setting, is something
Right.
that isn't being reckoned with either, right? Like that ability. I mean, again, I up in Canada, I always think about the fact that we have berries 24/7, but this is something that's like very, very, there's like these niche seasons across different geographies here where you have berries, for 2 weeks, and then there's
Yeah.
another where you have it for 3 weeks, and that's it. So I want to bring it back to the idea of your restaurant, and thinking particularly around the politics that you bring into the restaurant, and how, you spoke earlier of both of you experiencing a lot of issues with the restaurant industry and with hospitality. And I know I've seen that myself working restaurants as well. So can you speak a little bit to how you're looking at changing some of the more fraught elements of hospitality and restaurant industry through the work that you're doing with Masala y Maíz?
Yes. Okay. Well, when we started Masala y Maíz, we wanted it to be a worker-centered project, right? Like putting workers first. And I think in any conversation around systemic change, we need to put them, like, center the needs and experiences of the most vulnerable. And in case of the restaurant industry, those are the workers and the farmers and the producers, right? Our belief is that if we create and kind of organize our business to caretake the most vulnerable first, and the business will fall in line. The business will be successful because then our community will be successful and thriving. So we're taking this all of our decision-making process always has to be first at the benefit of the workers and the community, and then it kind of spreads down to the business as a whole. What that looks like is having really humane operating hours. We're a lunch-only restaurant. We don't open for dinner. That means that our staff and everyone that works at the restaurant, including Norma and I, can have evenings free where we can, pursue our other interests, where we can be with our families, where we can go out to eat or have a social life or have some semblance of a work-life balance. We know that we would make a lot more money if we were open for dinner, right? But I think that act of just prioritizing quality of life for everyone that works at the restaurant is huge. And that means that we, perhaps make less profit, but that all of us that are engaged with the restaurant have a better lifestyle. We do, shared tipping where everyone gets tipped the same amount, whether they're a server or a, dishwasher. We have a horizontal leadership program where all of the staff have, like a collective leadership in the operations. We have a team coach. We have a really great benefits package. We do all this kind of stuff to constantly critique and better our restaurant model. And that's just very little of all the things that we do. Most of this work isn't visible to the customer. Like the client isn't seeing all this stuff, but it's why the food tastes good. I think that's why our food has sold. That's why the restaurant feels like a place of joy, because we're bringing good politics to the table and also using that to uplift the social movements that we believe in. And I think that's what it means for the restaurant to be an activist project, is trying to be coherent in every part of the operations, not just with good sourcing practices and not just with environmental sustainability, but with cultural sustainability and with making sure that labor is central in every decision we make.
I think that also speaks to what, Norma, you had mentioned earlier, like the spirit of the restaurant space when you first encountered it. And it just in speaking with you and in watching your Chef's Table episode and learning more about the work that you're doing, I think that's like it like radiates off both of you in terms of the work that you're doing. And I know it's a significant undertaking, but you can feel it in being able to chat with you and the deep histories of knowledge that you bring to what you're doing as well.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up, do you mind sharing where people can find you and your work online if they want to follow the story of Masala y Maíz and the two of you as well?
I think the best place right now is to find us on Instagram, to reach out to us there, at Masala y Maíz, for our personal accounts at Norma Listman, at Saqib Keval. There's also the Chef's Table episode. There's a lot of really cool articles about us. I think if you're more interested in the politics behind the work that we do, I really like this mini documentary that was done by Eastern Standard Time, that you can find online if you search Eastern Standard Time, Masala y Maíz, and that goes more into not just Norma and I, but more into the staff and the team that makes this project function, because it is a massive undertaking between a lot of people.
Yes, it's a big community. And I wanted to also, if you're interested in knowing more of the kind of the fucked up histories of corn, there's Professor Enrique Ochoa, who's an author too, and his research around corn and his critique of the industrialization of corn, it's amazing.
Okay, perfect. I'll hunt those down and put them in the show notes for people to check out as well.
Yeah.
His book, I think, was just published, Mexico from Feast to Famine, I think.
And before companies like Macienda, there's a company called Maseca, which it's so ironic and funny that not funny, actually the names are so similar. And in one of his books, I can't remember the name, he explores how this company came about and what they did to Mexico. They use only GMO corn and how they sort of destroy the taste of corn. And it's very interesting that these new companies are using sort of the same model, but claiming doing the right thing, started by also another company started by the Whitezican. So his research and his work is pretty phenomenal.
Okay, that sounds incredible. I will definitely be checking that out as well. Thank you for sharing that one.
Yeah.
Well, Norma and Saqib, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I love the work that you're doing. I really, really appreciate it because I know you've got a lot going on. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
That was Norma Listman and Saqib Keval. I've linked their restaurant, social media, and Chef's Table episode, as well as the resources that Norma mentioned in the episode, in the show notes below if you want to follow along and learn more. You can also find all this at our website at anthodish.com under episodes. Thanks so much for listening to Anthodish. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out. For more Anthodish, you can sign up for my newsletter at sarahdugan.substack.com or find me on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook at Anthodish Podcast. I always love hearing from you and what you're thinking about food. Sound editing, intro music, and production was done by Lucas Wojcicki at lucassound.com. Anthodish is produced in partnership with the American Anthropological Association. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.